take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to Life in Rabbit.
So, on this podcast, we talk a lot about mental health, and we have a lot of advocates and speakers and people who talk a lot about their own experience, which is great. But today I'm really, really excited to welcome to the show Thoughts Undone, the great and powerful Sydney Dean. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Brian. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Really appreciate you being here. You are as I pull up your bio, just to make sure I get it right, a registered professional counselor candidate.
Mm-hmm.
So does that just mean you're kind of like in some sort of training before you get like something a little bit official, or is that more of an official title?
Yeah, that just means that I'm under supervision still.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
What I'm really interested in about this, because it's always one thing to say you want to help people, as someone who's involved in mental health, I'm always like, yeah, if you ever want to chat, I'm here to listen, and all those things are great, but I also find I never know what to say, and I'm afraid to say certain things in case it gets out of hand in certain ways or they misinterpret it. What I'm interested is, how does one decide, this is what I want to do with my life? I want to talk to people about like the hardest things that they think about and they've gone through. What sparks a decision like that? That's probably a long-winded story to go with that, but please feel free to share it all.
Yeah, definitely. I feel almost as though it's kind of a decision that I guess I didn't make very lightly, and I also didn't really make intentionally, if that makes sense, in the same stroke. I've always been kind of like called, if that's something that you want to say, like called towards doing it, because I have throughout my life in like various circumstances found myself in positions where I am just genuinely deeply interested in what is going on with people, particularly when they're going through like a tough time. So I often would find myself in positions where I would be giving like advice to a friend, or like consoling a family member, just kind of like giving myself in like the service of others. And it's something that I feel like I was like really good at doing, and I was very interested in doing it. And so I decided that like I would be a good fit to like go ahead and like do that, like as like a career move. And I honestly can't really see myself doing anything else. Like I'm a very much like a people person in that sense. Like this is what I guess I see myself doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've always wanted to ask the question, when you have people around you talking about really difficult subjects,
Mm-hmm.
what does that do to like your own mental health? Like, how do you kind of separate the job versus your personal life? Because I'm sure a lot of it gets taken home with you. Like, what is that toll like for people in your field? I've always just kind of been curious about it.
Yeah, it's something that like going through training and stuff, and like going through school, you're always kind of like warned about, or not, well, yeah, warned to be like aware of like transference and countertransference, which is essentially when something in like your client like triggers something in yourself, and if you're like not careful, like you'll bring that into the counseling relationship. So I'm always like aware of that, like the potential for that, I should say. So I think like from my perspective, like I definitely have to be aware of that and like kind of keep it in check, I guess you could say. Cause yeah, like some things can be really heavy, and some things can like trigger things that are painful for me, like based on like my own experiences and whatnot. But that's like the same case with like if you're like talking with a friend and it's someone that you really care about and they say something that like makes you feel sad, I guess like from my perspective, like I definitely have to be aware of like the boundaries that I have for myself. And I think that like I do a fairly decent job of like knowing where my trigger points are and like knowing like where my pain points are, and like owning that and like not like putting that in someone else's story and like being sure not to put their story like in my story. So yeah, it becomes like a question of like invisible boundaries, I guess you could say.
Interesting. How, you just kind of brought up an interesting point, that those invisible boundaries, and I'm just trying to think about how I want to frame the question, because when someone says something that might be triggering to you, or like bring up, or you just said, inserting yourself into someone else's story, like, can you just like elaborate a little bit more on what that means and what that might look like? Would it be something as being said that like someone said like, one time I was bullied in school? Is it like, oh yeah, so was I? And then, you kind of take away the part of the story from your patient, or, I'm just trying to like wrap my head around it and decipher it.
Yeah, definitely great question. I think it would really depend on like the individual counselor and like how they like dealt with that. Like I guess you could like insert yourself in the sense that you could take on their story and like, but at the same time also like you're like the role of like a therapist or like a counselor isn't to like tell your own story. So I think that like most people will be like very cautious to do that. I guess the way that I meant it was in the sense of like hearing someone's story and like resonating deeply with it to the point that you're like, ooh, like that like triggered something in me that like is maybe like an icky like pain point. And then therefore like not being able to be like unbiased in the like the space that you're trying to hold for someone and like the advice that you're trying to give to them, because you're no longer speaking from like a neutral standpoint. You're speaking from a place of, I once went through something similar and I was like really sad and like affected by it in that sense. And this might have been something that like I would have done at that point. If that makes sense.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or, I'm also kind of picturing it like maybe someone comes in and starts talking about a problem that is like totally against what you believe in your life, and that you have to kind of be like, whoa, okay, like, got to separate this like from my personal versus professional type thing. Like someone comes in, they're like, I hate this particular group of people and they're causing me all these issues, and you're just okay, and you have to like really kind of hold yourself back and think it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it is like a really like fundamental part of any sort of counseling relationship is like they call it like the therapeutic dynamic or the therapeutic relationship, sorry. And so like what that means is essentially like the fit of the two people and like if they'll like vibe, if they like click, if they get along together. So it's up to both parties to like individually determine if they feel as though there is like a good dynamic between the two. So if there was someone who came in that was like fundamentally like against your viewpoints, it would be a good decision to choose to not work with them if you feel as though like you would be impaired in your ability to like help them.
Right.
And then likewise, if like an individual was seeking counseling, and they found someone that like they didn't click with, like they would have the ability to say like, oh no, actually like I'm going to keep searching for someone else. So it is like, it's an interesting like forming of a relationship, but yeah, it takes like both parties to determine like, is it going to be a good click or not, or a good fit?
as like a host who works in media and has a podcast, I
Mm-hmm.
love that you brought that up, because it's like sets up the segue.
Yeah.
Because I was like, my next question is going to be, you know, as someone who, I shouldn't say as someone, but just, you know, on Twitter and on social media, you know, and a lot of like follow a lot of advocates and people who might be struggling, and they use social media as an outlet. One of the
Mm.
biggest things is like people see a lot of people don't like therapy because they have an initial, you know, like they didn't get along with their therapist, or
Mm-hmm.
the person didn't listen, or they felt they didn't listen, or didn't give them what they wanted to hear. You know, how delicate of a balance between like sales and being yourself, but having someone come in, you know, like, does there need to actually be like a good friend relationship? Or like, on the other hand, like, could you also get something from someone who you might not agree with, but like gives you those straight goods that you need to hear? You know what I mean? Like, they don't kind of sugarcoat anything, and they're like, like, this is what's going wrong, and you might not like to hear it, but this is it. You know what I mean? Like, where's that kind of balance between, you know, all those different elements on seeing a patient?
Yeah.
There's a lot of rambling rather than a question. I do that,
That's
but
okay. Yeah, no worries. Uh, where my mind, when as you were speaking, I was like going to like different places, like where I wanted to touch on. So where's my mind taking me right now? I feel like it's almost like a perfect storm, not a perfect storm. That's maybe not what I'm trying to say. It's like such a fine balance that you have to find. And it's also, I think, from my perspective, like it's like going into like any sort of like therapy, regardless of what it is, it's probably going to like bring up things that are uncomfortable. And so it makes sense that like people, like some people might not like therapy because of that, because it brings up things you're uncomfortable. And if that is like paired with someone who you don't feel safe with or you don't vibe with, then of course that's also going to leave a bad flavor in your mouth, in terms of like the therapy situation. Um, I really feel like it comes down to like the relationship between the two people involved. Because like even if something is uncomfortable that's like discovered or like talked about like in a therapy situation, if like the space and the dynamic is supportive and it's safe, then there is like this safety that's there naturally that like people feel comfortable like leaning into. Um, yes, and that's like something, it takes time to like build trust, and it takes time to like build that connection. And so it's like a very delicate, I guess, like relationship in that sense, because like you, on one hand, you're there and you're supportive, and there is like this, as you said, like no sugarcoating kind of thing. But then there's like the delicateness of trying to like support someone through something that's like really difficult. So it is like an interesting balance of like showing up for a person, as well as like understanding that you are like with them in a time that's like difficult, or it can be difficult.
Mm-hmm. One of the weirdest kind of things I've experienced going through, you know, my story and my journey and into exploring all the issues I have, but it's like that balance between, when is it okay to be compassionate, you know, from somebody to me or to myself, or
Mm-hmm.
when do I need that, you know, for lack of a better phrase, like kick in the ass, that tough love, you know, which one am I going to respond to at a certain time? And learning that, it's such a, it's difficult, it's really really hard, because,
Yeah.
you know, it changes up on me so much, and I just know a lot of people struggle with it, and with that balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like it's like you have to like read into situations. Like, when does a person need something? Like, when is there a way to be compassionate while still giving them like the kick in the ass, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it can be tricky for sure to navigate those waters, because you don't want to like push someone too much, but you also don't want to like not show up for them in the way that like they need you to, for sure. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, if someone told me, Ryan, listen, you just need to take care of yourself,
Mm,
and you can just lie in bed all day, you know, I would. And I don't know if that's good for me. Like, there's
yeah.
a large part of me that really gravitates towards a little bit of a tougher approach. And what I mean by
Mm-hmm.
that is, like, I'll watch people run, not actually like watch, but they'll post a quick video of them like running 100 miles or something. And they're just like, you can tough it out. You can get through it. You can, like, just it's mind over matter type stuff. And, like,
Mm-hmm.
I find that very, I'm not going to go run 100 miles. Just like, can't do that. But you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, those exuberant amounts of like athleticism and strength, I'm like, I find myself, oh, if they can do that, I can do this. Sometimes I need people to put things very bluntly to me, or else
Mm-hmm.
I'm just my mind's gonna be like just all over the place, and I'm like, racing to every scenario until they're just like, no, Ryan, this. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, you're right, okay, and then it's like it's all gone, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But then
yeah.
at the same time, I don't want to be, am I doing harm to myself by always trying to push through all these different scenarios with that
Mm-hmm.
approach? That's what I mean by that balance. Like, how do you know what's right and wrong and to do in that particular moment?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think it can be very tricky, like thinking about it from like a personal standpoint, like thinking about it like in my own life. There are definitely times when like I need that kick in the butt, and there are times when like I need someone to be like soft, or like I need to learn to be soft with myself. I think it is very much like a balance, and like tuning into like what you need like in a given moment, and like knowing yourself enough to know like when you need that kick in the pants, or like when you need that like that softness, I guess. um it's a fine balance for sure, and I think it takes time to figure out what you need, and I think it also depends like in the situation, like situation to situation,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. Getting into, therapy and stuff, because it's something that, at least for me, I like kind of recommend to everybody, whether they are, you know, they have a mental illness or certain experience that needs to be dealt with, or they're fine, and like it's just kind of like a someone to chat with and
Mm-hmm.
work on your kinks. I find it just makes you so much more of a wholesome person, and makes you think about things you're not going to think about. So
Mm-hmm.
I like to recommend it for everybody, but I'm kind of wondering, because a lot of people, especially when they're struggling, it's really hard to get them to take that initial step
Mm-hmm.
to going basically. Do you have like sort of like maybe clear up misconceptions that surround counseling services, therapy, psychotherapy, all those types of things? Are there certain things that maybe you hear people talk about that, and you're just like, no, 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 like that's not true. Like, it's more like this. Like, is there any you can think of off the top of your head?
The immediate one that like comes to my mind, which I don't know if it like specifically speaks to the question that you like asked or like posed, but like the big misconception that like I find myself like battling in terms of like a counselor is that like it's not my like job to fix someone's problem.
Mm.
It's like my job to help someone um, be like comfortable and like find strength or find compassion for themselves or find meaning in the situation, and to like help them realize that they have the capacity to navigate their own lives, I guess.
Right.
Because I'm not like the expert of like anyone's life, and like no therapist, counselor, psychotherapist, psychologist, whoever is like the expert of someone else's life. I mean, like to an extent, like you can give like advice, especially when you get into more like challenging situations that come with like specific like mental diagnoses. But for the most part, I mean, like people know there is like strength that everyone possesses, and like people know or have an inkling as to like what they can do or what they should do to like help themselves, or like the way that like they need help from like other people. And so like the way that I look at my position is like I'm here to like help you help yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Because I think a lot of like, before I started going, the picture I had in my head. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I shouldn't judge it, but I don't expect you have before, have you?
I don't think I have. No,
No, that's
doesn't sound
okay.
familiar.
So anyway, two guys, it's like a doofus movie, but like they go through time to try to finish a history report, and they get a bunch of famous figures. Anyways, when I think of therapy, I always go back to Sigmund Freud, because they grab Sigmund Freud, and he's like this white, like old dude, white hair, beard with a pipe and stuff.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like my perception of it, and me lying on like a little sofa and them asking me about my dreams and my parents, and them being like, oh, you have this like you're afraid, or you feel trapped in your life and you need to do this, right? Like that was always my perception of it, until I found it. Like I went and I was like, oh, like I literally just am like talking, and they're
Yeah.
just kind of talking with me, and then it's like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. And I mean, like, yeah, Freud's a classic like example to bring up, and he comes from like a very like particular uh like therapy standpoint. So that there's like the different sorts of like standpoints or like houses that you can think of. So like psychodynamic and humanistic and all of the other variations. And so like with each practitioner, like they have like a different viewpoint or like stance that they take based on like theories. And so some people will like pull from different theories, and some people will be like firmly rooted in one. I think that, I guess I probably can't say that for certain, but I feel like a lot of people would probably have like more of like a mixed bag of like, I like this from that, and that makes sense for this thing, and this makes sense for that thing. And it becomes more of like an eclectic view of like helping someone, as opposed to like a one size fits all. And that's like I'm summing it up like very quickly. But yeah, I definitely know what you mean, because like I also assumed like similar things when it comes to therapy, of like what it would be like and how I would be helped and like that sort of thing. But yeah, like I think and of course it comes down to the individual too. Like who is it, like as an individual, like as a person that is helping like a client or is helping someone. Yeah, it is a very like personal thing, I guess. Like the way that you feel like you can help someone, or the way that you can show up for someone, like the theories that you provide, or the theories that you like are rooted in, and like the advice you give from that, and then like your own personal twist on it. Yeah, I don't know if I spoke to anything.
I really am interested in sciencey stuff, because I'm like, I always sucked at science and math, so I always stayed away from it. So my favorite thing is just talking sciencey stuff, just to get a better understanding. So what are some of like the theories, and please go as deep as you want into them, that you kind of pull from? Or is it really like you're talking to me and you're hearing me say these things, and like you'll go back to the textbook and be like, okay, I think Ryan is XYZ, and you'll use it, apply those to my particular situation? Or is there things you're more kind of like grounded in and use on a regular basis?
I think it would depend, like each person I feel like would have a different approach. I guess like the way that I look at it, or like the way that I do it, is like an understanding or a viewpoint or like a worldview that I already hold. And that like helps me be able to like talk with someone in a way that feels like very natural to me. Because if I'm trying to pull from things that like I don't necessarily agree with, or they don't really like make sense for my worldview, then like I would have a much harder time like relating with someone and like empathizing with someone. So like things that like I think about a lot are like going back to the whole like you're like the expert of your own life, like a humanistic approach, or like narrative, sort of like the stories we tell ourselves. And of course, like I think that like looking at the past is like very important to like tell like where a person is like in the present moment. So like attachment theories, and like there's so many things to take into consideration when it comes to anybody, which is something that like I like think about like in my day-to-day life with like friends and family members and like people that I talk to in a more professional setting. There's like so much that goes into a person like showing up as they are, and that changes like so frequently based on like the experiences that they have and like who they are, who they interact with, that it's like a good thing to be able to like pull from different areas and not be so like firmly rooted in like one house or another, or like one field and another or in another.
Do you find it hard to turn it off? Like you're talking to just like a random friend over the phone, and they're just telling you about something that happened, and like, do you find it hard to like turn it off and maybe not analyze people in a professional way, or is it like pretty easy to like separate it when you get back to regular life?
I think that like I guess I would be going back to like talking about like from like being younger and like realizing that like I had this like desire to help people, and I had this kind of like ability to be able to like understand someone's perspective and like empathize with them. So it's kind of just like who I am, to be able to do that. That's a great question.
It's one of those things, it's like,
yeah.
When you're talking to people all day and you kind of are just listening to them and then figuring out different patterns and different things. Like, I wonder, do you like subconsciously do it? Like when you're talking to your partner and then you kind of have to stop yourself and be like, no, like it's a normal conversation. I'm not meant to give them advice on this one, or, unsolicited advice, because I was thinking of this thing, it's just kind of like one of those, like as a marketing professional, I find I extremely hard to turn off, because everything I see, I'm like, oh, I could use that for this, or, oh, it was a great commercial, I wonder how I could manipulate it. It's one of those things you can turn off.
Yeah, definitely. I think if anything, I become like almost like more quiet. Like I feel like I don't actually give a lot of advice to like friends or like partners, that sort of thing. I try to take more of like a neutral position where it's like I'm here to like listen, which doesn't mean that I don't feel the things that like they're talking about, but I also like very much like just try to like empathize with them and like really like give them the space to like feel into like their own situation. And like most of the time, like the people that I talk to on like a personal level, like friends and that sort of thing, like a lot of the time they just like want someone to listen to them, which I have like no problem doing. But I mean, if someone like does ask me for advice, and I have no issue with like giving it, of course, but like I try, and I've always tried, I think that's always just kind of been like my natural default would just be to like hold space and to like let someone talk and like ask for the things that they need, as opposed to like give advice if it's not necessarily necessary.
Can you tell me a little bit more what like holding space means? I've I've heard people use that term a lot, and just kind of like clarification on what that kind of like looks like and how you can do it well.
Yeah. I know what you mean when it comes to like the term holding space. It's something that like I've heard for forever. Um, and I feel like it has different like meanings along the way. I think it like would depend like on the person and like what that means for them. But like the way that I think about holding space, it's coming from a place of being like very neutral and like non-judgmental. And so like going into it and like being there for the person and like not being there for yourself, like not having an agenda to like make a point across or to get a point across or to get anything across, to like give focus and attention and like compassion to the person who is like speaking. Cause I think, yeah, the way that I understand like holding space, it's like often in situations where someone is like talking or a group of people are talking and there's like vulnerable things that are being brought up, and it can be like uncomfortable and scary. And so like as the person who is listening, it's like your job to hold the space for the person so that they feel comfortable in that discomfort. So with that in mind, like the way that I think about it is like, I'm here to listen to you, to not judge you, to be neutral, and to give you the floor to say what you need to say, and then like ask for what you need to ask from me. Just like there, like you're there in service of the other person.
Right. Oh, that clears it up, because you just kind of hear it. And a lot of terms, especially when it comes to mental health and talking about with different people, like a lot of terms come up that people use, and you're kind of like, wait, what does that mean? I just had people on from the Mindful Project, Aaron McLeod and Dr. Rachel Landville. We were talking about mindfulness, and I was just kind of like, what is it? Like, you hear everyone's like, oh, it's mindfulness. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I don't know. Just go do it. It's mindfulness. So it's funny. You hear all these things. You're kind of like, I don't even know what that really means, but okay, yeah, I'll try to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think the same thing when it comes to like really big topics or like terms that like are just thrown around. And I think they're thrown around to the point where like everyone just kind of assumes that they understand what it means. But then when it comes down to it, it's like, wait, what does it mean though? Like, what are we doing here?
Right. Because how can you do it? How can you do it properly without really understanding? And I think a lot of people are kind of afraid to ask.
Yeah. It's it's like almost like when you meet someone new and you're told their name, and then you like leave and you forget their name, and then you meet them again. You're like, oh God, like how do I bring it up that like I don't know what your name is?
Yeah.
But I'm also being like kind and like respectful of that fact.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I find particularly interesting, when I getting in the prep work done and for our chat, you put that, you work with people from diverse backgrounds, experiences, sexualities, gender identities, expressions. That is a very touchy subject for a lot of people these days. That's a very polarizing kind of topic, when it comes to, I guess, when it comes to political beliefs and social beliefs, and you go on the internet and you see a whole bunch of different things going on there. How do I phrase the question? These people are having wrong term, but people who are experiencing difficulties when it comes to these certain subjects, they have to deal with a lot on their own end, and then they have the societal implications of everything going on top of that. How hard is it for people experiencing this in the world right now, from what and your experience? I hope I phrased that in a very nice way, because I meant that truly as a question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, it very much came across as a question. And a nice question, that is. How do I understand it? Yeah, the viewpoint that I have, it's like very much like rooted. So when I was, okay, going way back here, I feel like it's very much like an individual sort of experience. And so we're coming back into that, like holding space for people as they like figure themselves out. So thinking about it like from my own perspective, so like I'm someone like who identifies as female, she, her pronouns. Like when I was growing up, I like had like this very interesting sort of like coming to discover like my gender and my like gender expression. So I had like really short hair, like I played with all the boys. Like it's always like this fun like story about like how when I was younger, like I wore like coveralls without like a t-shirt when I was like a little kid, and like I would wear a backwards hat and like work boots and like want to like be out in the garage with my dad, and like no one ever really like questioned it. They just kind of like let me do it. They let me figure out like what, like how I wanted to express myself. And so like coming into like adulthood or like teenage years and then adulthood, like I feel like so like grounded and very lucky, very privileged to have had the experience that I did, where I had a family who was just very like understanding of I'm just figuring myself out. And so like that's kind of like the view that I have currently. I mean, like I feel like people very much are like on a path of discovering who they are in so many ways, and like gender and gender expression and gender identity, or it's like one of those things where there's so many viewpoints that people can have, or like ways of thinking about it that's so like strict and narrow. And but ultimately like what it does is it limits the people who are actually like living those experiences, which is, I think, like very heartbreaking, because like I said, like I would probably like say that I was like likely very confused about like my gender like when I was a kid, but like I was in a space where I was supported enough to like be comfortable in like deciding who I was, because of I decided that's who I was, as opposed to being told who I was, which I know that a lot of folks like aren't like they don't have that luck to like have that support in that sort of sense. So I always like, I think that's how I think about it. Like when I'm interacting with people who are like navigating their own journeys when it comes to gender and like discovering who they are, like I always think about like that experience for myself. And I think that that helps ground me in like having compassion and being able to like hold space for people.
Right. Did you feel, so I know you said you came like from a loving family and you know, was supported, but when it comes to, you know, God, high school, you know, kind of societal pressures and those boxes that we kind of fit everybody in. And I assume you're around the same age as me, where even when we talk about, you know, LGBTQ, like that still even wasn't that big of a thing. And that was only like 10, 12, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Did you, you know, was there a lot of pressure outside of your family in your own life that made you think, oh, I have to be this way, oh, I have to be that way? You know, I see this commercial doing one thing, I see, you know, the girls at school doing this thing. Like, was there a lot of pressure that you felt you needed to almost follow?
Yeah, I feel like it was almost pressure that like I put on myself, like based on things. And I think like some of that comes down to like a lack of representation, like in society or like in the media that was present at that time. And I mean, like it is still like not as like diverse representation in the media and in society. Like it still isn't like on pars to like what like a heteronormative sort of lifestyle would be. so I think that like that definitely informed the way that like I would think about my future and think about who I was. And I think that that is changing little by little from like what I have experienced. So when I was in university, I was part of an organization. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of them or not, Ryan. They're called the Get Real Movement.
No, I haven't.
Oh, they're a really great organization. That I can't remember what university they started in. I think Queens, maybe. But it's run by someone named Chris Duder, and he started like this organization. He and his friend, I think, he and his friend Marley. And so they started this organization that was all about like unlearning homophobia and transphobia and the different sorts of like language practices that people learn like as they grow up. And by the time that I was in university, it was to the point where different universities within Canada and some of the states would have like different branches like at their schools. And so I went to Dalhousie, so we had one there. And so what we would do is we would go into like different schools within, and Dalhousie's in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. So we'd go to different schools within Halifax, like middle schools and high schools, and we give presentations about unlearning like the harmful language practices that we have, like that's so gay and that sort of thing. And we would talk about like what it means to like what we mean when we're talking about like sex and gender expression and that sort of thing. And I remember, I think we must have been in like a middle school class, because I remember like the kids weren't that old, and I remember like asking someone like what does asexuality mean, and like 3 or 4 different people like stuck up their hands, and they gave like this really like in-depth like answer. And I was like, whoa, like when I was in grade 7, like that certainly wasn't something that like I even knew what to talk about. You know, it was kind of like you're gay or you're straight, and most people are straight. And so like I think from that, like I really do feel like there are like a lot of younger folks who just by the way that things are like changing, like as time moves forward, like it's becoming more of like a not mainstream, but like it's becoming more dominant in society to like be like diverse and to accept diversity and to like be tolerant of like different folks. And so, yeah, I don't know if that like answered a question, but like I think back to that a lot, actually.
Super interesting because, you know, asexuality is still something that doesn't get talked about like really at all. You know, I give the internet a lot of credit for the increase in you know the speed of the conversations we're having now. So you have a lot of the idiots on Twitter and Facebook who, you know, still spout the, you know, Trudeau stuff and all that, you know. So you get a lot of that bad, but you also get a lot of that good where people who've never had a voice have a voice, and you can hear from them, and you can hear all these different experiences. And I've had this conversation a lot on the podcast where, you know, a lot of it, and you'll hear a lot of older people kind of reference it like this is like, oh, this came out of, you know, like all of a sudden like 2016 happened, and then all of a sudden we were doing all these things. And like my theory is, and you know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my theory is like no, these conversations were always happening, but it took social media and the really the rise of the popularity for these conversations to reach the masses, because they weren't being shown on traditional media. You know, the news, the radio, like those things, they weren't being talked about there because, you know, you have time and certain things happening and a bunch of things happening on the world. So it took, you know, YouTube, it took, you know, Twitter, where people finally had a voice and were able to form connections of people who think the way they do or feel the way they do, whether that comes to their sexuality or the way they express themselves or their, you know, their gender and all those different things, mental health, that, you know. So for a lot of the bad that social media brings, there's a lot of good, because I know I've learned a ton just from following conversations. And am I perfect? And absolutely not. And that's why I like this podcast and having people like you on, or Sarah, or all these people, so I can ask these questions genuinely and just learn from them, and try to get a better perspective and understanding on them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. Yeah, it provides like such a space that like never existed before. But I agree that like the conversations were still happening, but like just weren't really known to like the larger society. Yeah, so I agree with that for sure. And it does, yeah. Yeah, there are some positive things to social media. I will say that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It like I said, but it's not there yet, and there's still a lot of that conversation happening. Like I said, referencing, asexuality is still not a part of really the dialogue outside of people who might experience it, and then how are close to that lifestyle. I remember my brother, and I can say this because he was the first episode of the podcast I did. I remember when he came out, when I was when he was 16, so I would have been 18, 19, 20, whatever. And I was from a small town. So this small town, there was never knew any LGBT folks. There was none of that. There was no racial diversity. It was like straight hick white town, like that's what it was. So for him to come out and, him explore his journey, referencing what we were talking about a little bit earlier, a big thing. And as a hockey player, using the F term, I don't really want to say it because I don't even feel comfortable saying it anymore, because he actually would call me out on it, or saying that's so gay, or what, that's gay. He would call me out on that until it was finally, now I can be like, it's gone. I don't say that instinctively or subconsciously anymore. And I think that's just kind of what people need to reframe their brains and get out of those habits.
Yeah, like it is very much an unlearning process, because like from such a young age, like you're unknowingly hearing so many things, or like unconsciously viewing so many things, or hearing so many things, and you don't really have a control over it. And because of that, you like end up forming these, I guess, just like ways of like thinking, or ways of talking and like relating with people that like aren't really like founded in like what you actually believe. Like there's so many times like when I was younger and I'd say something and I'd be like, why did I say that? And especially like if I knew that, or if I had found out, I guess later, that it was like a hurtful thing to say, or like like just not a great thing to say that was like inclusive. I'd be like, I don't even like really understand why I said that. Like I just said it because like everyone around me is saying it, and like everyone I know says it. And similarly, like I also came from like a smaller town that wasn't very diverse, and I think that it was very, very prevalent there. And it was just kind of like what people did. And it is very much, from my perspective anyway, like an unlearning process that you have to go through. Like if you see value in changing it, then like you very much have to like unlearn like the things that you like unconsciously learned.
Yeah, and it can be done, but it takes work. Not like that much work, but just a couple times of someone calling you out on it, and then you're just then it becomes kind of like you'll catch yourself, and then before you know it, it's gone. It's just I definitely find it frustrating how many people are resistant to certain things that aren't that big a deal. Like you go to the pronouns conversation, and for whatever reason, people have such a hard time not referring to people by the pronouns that they ask. And I'm just like, why is that like the hill? Why is that the hill that you're gonna die on? I don't understand. Like just my whole belief in life is just like, as long as it doesn't bring harm to me or my family, like, or like my loved ones, then like do what like makes you happy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, as long as you're happy, go for it. And I support you 100%. Like that, because otherwise it doesn't affect me.
Mm-hmm.
So why, why would that be my opposition? I just don't understand how people go about that. Like, it just does not compute in my head.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I feel that for sure. Um, yeah, I think like on top of like the example that you gave of like someone correcting you a few times when you say something and then like changing it to a point where it's like suddenly gone. I think like in addition to that, there has to be like this like uh you have to almost like see value in changing it for it to like really stick and for it to like be gone. So I think that like people who have a hard time like coming like off their hills of like, ooh, this is the thing I'm gonna fight until like I die, uh there might be like a lack of like desire to change or like a lack of like understanding um like the value, I guess, in like changing that opinion. I don't know if that makes sense or not,
Yeah.
but I'm just like speaking a little bit here.
No, it's okay. That's what you're here for.
True.
In your like, I don't know, like, did you study psychology, or was that like kind of like the study that led you to your field now?
Yeah, so my background is in psychology and gender and women's studies.
Right. So, in the field of psychology, and what you studied, or like, I don't know, in any of the readings or the research or the theories, like, is there a particular way you can go about, like, so you're talking to somebody who is, homophobic. Like, is
Mm-hmm.
there like a way, like, that research shows that you could seed the idea of them changing if they don't have the desire? You know what I mean? Like, they're not budging on their belief, but is there like any way that you know of that kind of like says that, like, if you take this approach, you have a way better chance of changing, well, when you say it like that, changing someone's perspective, it sounds
Mm.
cynical and evil, but that you can use to get your point across in a more friendly manner that might make them more susceptible to seeing your point of view.
Mm. Hmm. I feel like it can be hard. It can be really hard to change someone's perspective about, especially about this sort of thing. Because a lot of it is just like rooted in like not really understanding or like a fear, I guess, a fear of change. And I think like part of what would make it easier, or maybe not easier, but like more likely to change would be if diverse lifestyles were more represented in like the dominant culture, like mainstream media, so that it was like normalized. Because like there's this idea like if it's almost like hush hush, like you don't see it so it doesn't happen, so when it like sneaks out it's like this scary thing. um so like if it was more like prevalent in the culture and like it was more like widely accessible or like widely viewed, then it might not be like this scary idea that you like have to change your mind. It would just be like, oh, like that's, of course, like that's just how we are, like that's, I mean, like from my perspective, that's um like heteronormativity and like heterosexuality is like so like just widely accepted. It's just because like that's all that we've ever really known. So like if it's within the culture that like there are other ways of like living and loving and relating, um then it's like easier to like widen like your viewpoint, I guess.
Right, that makes sense to me, because you even going a few years back, when you talked about representation, I didn't have a great understanding of it, but you know it's true that, because even now when you have a film about lesbians or what have you, it still almost becomes tokenized and
Mm-hmm.
definitely sexualized for sure, and especially when
Mm-hmm.
you talk about that. But like, there's still these certain boxes that, from even women to race to gender, that they still kind of always fall under, and never truly like just break through, right? Like, women are always, in a movie, they're guy crazy and fall for a guy who helps them get their life together. Or like I said, like, you look at something like Black Swan, which wasn't like a lesbian movie, but like
Mm-hmm.
the kiss in the story between Mila Kunis and Natalie Portman was definitely like super over sexualized, and like that's why people went to see the movie, just to see that. Like,
Yeah.
and you get into things like, like pornography and all that. Like, it's getting there, but it still gets into this certain box and framed a certain way that, like, it almost, well, it does it to me, that does it a lot more harm than good, especially with, men in particular. I think back to my bar days, and like guys always trying to get girls to kiss and all
Mm-hmm.
those things, right? Like, it doesn't really help the way that at least Hollywood, and what I'm particularly talking about, um, does the representation, at least right now. I mean, there's some change, but it's still, I even find it that, and that must hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you brought up a good point of like the like specific movies or like characters being like the token, as being like representative of like what it means. There's yeah, I agree with that for sure. And there's so many different things that like go like into play. Um, yeah, yeah, it's a hard one to nail down for sure. Um, I think something that can be like really harmful is when something is taken like the token way, or like something that's a token is like taken as like the only way to like be, or like the only way that, like, say someone who uh is like identifies as straight, they watch like a gay movie and they're like, oh, okay, so like that is what it means to be gay, and that's what every gay person or every person who identifies as gay like lives like and thinks like, because it takes away like the individual who like identifies as that, so it can be like damaging to like take on viewpoints of like lifestyles being a certain way, people being a certain way, and people as being like fixed in those roles without the ability to what's what I'm looking for, to like express themselves the way that they like want to.
Yeah, like, I think back to, even Will and Grace, which is a great show, and it broke a lot of barriers.
Mm-hmm.
But, for the longest time, I always thought that, like, if someone was gay, they had to be super flamboyant.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, if they weren't, then it's like, oh, well, you're not gay. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and then as you get older, you start understanding, or like Brokeback Mountain, like when that movie came out, if you watch that as a guy, like, especially like around like my friends and the kind of lifestyle I grew up in, like, people would call you gay,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And it's just like, you just watched the movie. It's an Oscar winner. What's wrong? Like, you
Yeah.
look back on it and you're like, it's so silly. But I remember like people being terrified, and people would make up rumors. Oh, you watched Brokeback Mountain, like, oh, and then
Mm-hmm.
like people would make fun of you at school. It was it's such a weird thing to look back on, but like, it still goes on today. Like, it's not much different for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of those things that are like so ingrained, like in the way that you think and like the way that you like relate with people. Like I remember being in middle school and like hearing, so I guess I should like clarify, like I like identify like as a lesbian, like I have a female partner. So like when I was younger and like just coming into like discovering who I was, like I remember hearing from people that I went to school with in middle school that like if you wore plaid like as a female, like it was like a very like gay thing to do, and like there was a lot of like negative connotation around that. And I find it really funny because today I'm actually wearing a plaid. um but so I remember like really just wanting to wear a plaid. I don't know if it was like my my little like stake in like coming into my sexuality and being like, oof, like I am gay or not. Or if I just genuinely wanted to wear a plaid because I just wanted to wear a plaid, because ultimately you don't have to be a lesbian to be a female and wear a plaid. But I remember like selecting like a pink plaid, and I didn't even like pink at the time, but I was like, okay, but if I wear plaid, then at least I'm wearing like a pink plaid. So that might like offset the fact that people might think that I'm gay if I'm wearing a plaid. And there's just so many different things that like from such a young age too, like you can be like navigating. And like, again, they're like stories and like thoughts that like aren't really even yours. They're just things that you're told that you're like, you're trying to navigate. So yeah, it's a very interesting space to live in for sure.
And you know, this is a little bit personal question, so if you don't want to answer it, I completely understand. But I'm just curious, because when I talked to my brother, like we always knew, he always knew. It was like, so it just, when he came out, we're like, okay, yep, we know, like move on. You know, growing up, like were you like, did you kind of always know? Were you worried about people finding out? Was it like a very confusing, touchy subject, or like you know, the way you've kind of described it, at least through now, that like, you know, you're a pretty comfortable person and comfortable, we're comfortable being the way that you were.
I remember like it was always something that like I thought about. Like I remember being a kid, and the first like memory that I have of like realizing that like I like wasn't straight, it was like I had a dream about like kissing a neighborhood friend of mine who was a girl, and I was probably in like grade 4 or something like that. So I was quite young, and I remember like sitting in the back seat of like my mom's car, like waiting for everyone else to get into the car. So it was just me in like the emptiness of the car. And I remember like thinking about this dream that I must have had like the night before, and like me saying out loud, I'm a lesbian, which like in retrospect is such a funny memory to have, like to like be in that space and like say that, to like have like such a deep understanding of like how I understood myself to be. And then of course, like I like grew up a little bit, and like I had boyfriends, and so it was very much like just kind of like, again, like exploring who I was and like navigating my space. And then I remember like being in university and like thinking, and again, it wasn't even a thought that was really mine, but thinking that like, oh, like having like crushes on like female friends like all throughout school, like it's just a phase, like I'm gonna like grow up or like get older and like marry a guy, and like that's just gonna be it. But then you get a little bit older and you're like, oh, but like I wouldn't be happy like in that place. So it's clearly like not a phase. It's like a way of being, and then it's like a matter of like being comfortable in that space, I guess. And from my perspective, in my experience anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting how people like come about who they are. Like you said, you help people kind of navigate the journey of who they are and their identity. And for everybody, I think it's a lifelong process, but it's always interesting to hear that perspective. And that like it at the end of the day, like just like the only reason like it was ever questioned is just because society said that was different. But at the end of the day, like you kind of always know, and that's the way it is, just like kind of being hetero, you know what I mean? Like it's just the way of being, and like it's not weird.
Yeah.
I always just find that particularly fascinating, because you know, especially from the time of where I grew up, that like it's not a different really experience other than society telling you it's different. And so I just always found that particularly interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely a very interesting topic. And so I feel like I have that view, or like I think about that when it comes to like many different areas of my life. I mean, like particularly the ones that are, what's the word I want to use for that? That are more like non-mainstream, I guess, if that makes sense. So like identifying as like a lesbian and being in an open relationship, and like it's just like a matter of me like challenging the things that like I've always been told my whole life, and like holding it up against the light and like assessing it, like does that actually like make sense for who I am, like who I understand myself to be, who I want to be, and like the lifestyle that I want to live. And sometimes it's not, and then it's like a matter of like, well, how do I go about like changing that or like unlearning that? How do I like seek support in that space? How do I have the difficult conversations that I feel like I need to have? Yeah, so it is very much like a constant, from me and my perspective anyway, like a constant interacting in my world and trying to determine for myself, like, how do I want to live and what's the kind of life that I want to have.
Right. And I love that. And I have such admiration for you and, for Sarah, and meeting the both of you, because, not to get into it too deeply, but, there's, you have made the choice to actually live your life the way that you want, and like explore the things like your desires, and to talk your way through them. And, like someone like myself, who's very restricted, self-restricted, but there's things that I've never done just because of, judgment or fear of what, people would say, or damage to reputation, or, all those different things. And so when I was first talking to Sarah, and she brought that up, it was just like, like, whoa, like, one, you never meet people. I mean, I hope now, as we were just talking, how society's progressing, you'll start more and more. But like, never met someone who lived a lifestyle like that, and to have people be open and at least answering questions, because I know it probably gets trivialized too. That, you don't want to come across as rude or anything like that. But I have a lot of respect for people who just like, who live their lives the way like they want to, and free from all those kind of barriers that a lot of us set up ourselves, and aren't willing to break through. And it's like, it's great to hear and learn and talk about it.
Yeah, because I think like what, obviously this can't be from like in every case, but like what makes it harder for people to like actually break through the barriers and like feel comfortable like exploring things that they want to explore and like living a lifestyle that they want to live is, in my opinion, like, yeah, like a lack of representation of like different ways of being. And so that's why I don't really have a problem with talking about things, like if I'm asked certain things, because like there's so many different ways to be like a human being, and there's so many ways of like living. Even if like you held up like two different people, they're both like they both live in Ottawa, they're both gay, they both like work the same job, like whatever, like the way that they decide to live their life in those identities is likely very different if you hold them up side by side. So like, I guess I just like to like express that there is like so much individuality, and that it's okay to be different, and that it's okay to like take time to figure out, like to become like intimate with yourself, and like learning who you are, and like exploring who you are, and like learning how to be comfortable with that.
So many of us are scared of it. I know myself, I'm definitely trying, but yeah, that might be one of the hardest things. And I think that's where a lot of problems stem, especially as you get older. All the frustrations, whether you're lashing out on your partner, you're on the internet, on people at the grocery store. You know what I mean? Like, it's just all these seated frustrations that you've never took the time to deal with or think about or explore, just kind of, bubble up to the top. And then before you know it, you're this angry 7-year-old man yelling at people to get off the lawn. I mean, that's putting it lightly for some of the things that people do, but
Yeah.
it's just, it sounds so easy when you just say it, but like to actually go out and do it. And I think that just, and that is just a perfect way to highlight like just how difficult lives are for people who, I guess, quote unquote, like you said, don't fit that mainstream way of living, that quote unquote human identity, that the people who kind of go against that grain and choose to live out, whether that's sexually or whatever, how more difficult it is for them, just because so many of us won't do it ourselves, but we'll criticize them for it. But you know what I mean? It's a delicate world, but it's I just, a lot of respect and admiration, like I said, and to learn about the different, like how like individuality is just so important, and to get out there, it's good.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Before I let you go, I want to ask the question.
Yeah.
Journaling. So I know, I attended one of your workshops with Sarah from Occupied Mind, and a lot of talking about journaling. And it's something, since you brought that up, I've been particularly fascinated in, and I'm just kind of curious, why does journaling help? And if you don't mind sharing, what does it do for you that it makes it so beneficial?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like journaling is something so important to like my like mental and emotional health. So I love talking about it, and Sarah likes to make jokes about that I have like so many journals, and like I'm always like filling them up and carrying them around. But yeah, so for me, so I started journaling like more seriously. I guess it was like probably 5 years ago now. For some reason, like I had heard somewhere that like journaling was like helpful. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. And so I remember like having such a hard time with it. And I would sit down and I'd like write out like to-do lists. And then I would feel bad about like those lists and being like, I don't understand like what I'm doing this for. Because I didn't really resonate with it at the time. It was like, I heard that like journaling is helpful, so I'm going to give it a try. And then like I kept coming back to it because I don't know, like I guess I saw value in like trying to figure it out. And so I would like write down like a few thoughts about like my day, because also like I think that like, so like growing up, I have a grandmother who like without a doubt like writes in her diary every day, and like it's just about like what she did that day, who she saw, like so maybe she called her daughter, she called like someone else, and like the conversation that they had. And so I kind of had this idea that like journaling was like a diary, and like I didn't really want to write about my day. Like I didn't want to write about like what I had for breakfast or whatever, who I talked to. But on the same time, like I had like all of these like things that I was like trying to work through internally and like trying to figure myself out. And sometimes I didn't really want to talk about it with anyone. Like I just wanted to like express it in a way that like I felt safe in doing so. So I kept trying, and I would just like write about things. And sometimes it would just be like, I had a bad day. And then like the next day would be like, I had a bad day because of this. And then like, I just kept coming back to this idea of like, just keep trying, like keep examining your thoughts. Like, you have something to say, like you have all these feelings, like you have a means of like putting them like pen to paper. So just keep trying. And so it was fine. And I remember like, having a really bad day in school, just being like, so I don't know what I was angry about. Just a moody 20-year-old, I guess.
Teenage angst.
Yeah, exactly. Like coming back from class, and I just like sat on my bed and I opened up my journal, and like I wrote for like 4 or 5 pages straight in like just chicken scratches. Probably didn't make a lot of sense. But like at the end, I was just so exhausted, and I like felt like this complete like cathartic like release of just like what it would be the same thing as if you had like so much to talk about and you finally like got with your friend and you just like unloaded all this stuff on them. And you're like, whoa, like I didn't know that I needed to say that until I said it. So like, that's the way that I think about it. And for me, like it helps me because it's a way of kind of like reality checking my thoughts, because like I can like very easily get caught up in like negative thinking patterns. And so like when I take something from my head and put it onto paper, I'm able to like reread it and be like, oh, but that actually doesn't hold up because X, Y, or Z reason, you know. It could be anything, but it's almost like proofreading like a paper. Like when I write it down, I'm able to go back and be like, okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. Or no, actually like that doesn't really hold up and here's why. So it's just a way that like I'm in conversation with myself, I guess is like a really easy way to put it. Like someone that I see value in talking with every day and like checking in with. So I guess I use journaling as a bit of like a mirror. Like I use it to look at myself and to examine what I'm going through on a daily basis, or like I try to do daily writing, but sometimes it's like every other day. But yeah, way of looking at myself.
Right. Well, because of you, I started trying. So thank you for allowing me to, or giving me the, I guess the inspiration to give it a shot and see where it goes. So we'll
Definitely.
check in and I'll let you know.
For sure. And sometimes it can be hard when it's like a blank page. So like I have like a few journals that are like prompted. So like it'll ask you a specific question and then you can write from there. So that might be a good avenue to take if you are like thinking about starting some writing.
Yeah, because I'm never short on things to say, that's for sure. And sometimes social media is not the best place for me to put out my thoughts. So yeah, once you said it, I was kind of like, oh, that might be a good idea. That might be right up my alley. So
yeah,
thank
you can try it.
Listen,
no worries.
I really appreciate you coming on and having a chat. Thoughts Undone is your website and kind of like I guess the online profile you go by. Where can people find you? Can they book any services with you? Give the old plug.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, you can find me on Instagram at thoughts.undone. I'm also on Facebook, Thoughts Undone. I think it might be Thoughts Undone Counseling. Yeah, Thoughts Undone Counseling. Currently, that's where I am, just on Instagram and on Facebook. Actually, never mind. I do have a website. I cannot forget about that, which is just thoughtsundone.com. And actually, that's how it started. I started Thoughts Undone like while I was in school. I started it as a blog, and that kind of formed into like my actual website when I like transferred over and like made services available. So yes, you can book services at Thoughts Undone. And the link to that is also like in my Instagram page. You can book from there. Yeah, Thoughts Undone.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the conversation. Very informative, and it gave me a lot of time. So take care. I know right now is really weird. So I hope you're doing okay. And I definitely look forward to catching up with you and Sarah down the road.
Thank you. And thank you so much again, Ryan, for having me on. It was such a pleasure to like have this time and space to connect with you. And I know that we did the workshop together, but it's good to like actually like chat with you.
Absolutely.
And very much hope that you're doing okay and all this COVID stuff and taking care of yourself. And I look forward to connecting with you again.
Perfect. All right. Thoughts Undone. Sarah. Oh, I was going to say Sarah. There we go. Sydney. Sydney Dean, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. See you.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.